Now, Ms. Graham, the next witness.
The first witness this afternoon will be Constable Ferrier, and she will be taken by my learned junior, Miss Thompson.
Before you ask questions, Ms. Ferrier, would you say the words of the affirmation after me? I solemnly, sincerely and truly
I solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole
truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Miss Thompson.
Thank you. What is your full name, please?
Cara Louise Ferrier.
Is that Constable Ferrier?
Yes.
May I ask your age?
I am 48.
And how many years police service do you have?
25.
Constable Ferrier, in front of you there's a black folder, and within it you will find a statement that you gave to a member of the inquiry team on the 28th of February of this year. I wonder, Miss Wildgoose, if we could put that up on the screen. It's SPBI 33, and if we might turn to page 6 and paragraph 31. What we see on the screen, Constable, is a copy of the statement that is before you in hard copy. And you will see that at paragraph 31 it reads, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. Do you see that?
Yes.
And on the hard copy before you, do we see your signature at the bottom of the page?
Yes.
It's been redacted on the version that we see on the screen, but you've got the signature on the hard copy in front of you.
That's correct.
In fact, have you signed every page of that statement?
I have.
Do we see that the date of the statement bears to be the 4th of December 2022, which I think must be a mistake?
Yes. Is it possibly the 12th of April 2022 when the statement was sent to me to be signed?
It could well be. It was certainly given, or the process of preparing the statement began at the end of February, so that's possible. I don't think it matters, but are you satisfied? You've got the hard copy in front of you. That's your statement,
yes.
That's your signature,
yes.
Even though the date is perhaps wrong. Did you have the opportunity to read over it before you signed it?
Yes.
And you're happy with the content
yes.
of the statement? Constable, you should also have in front of you an operational statement that you prepared yourself on the 28th of July of 2015. Do you see that?
Yes.
We don't need to put that up on the screen, but can I simply make you aware that both of those statements are available to you, they're evidence before the inquiry, and if you would find it helpful to refer to them when you're giving your evidence, you're free to do so.
Okay.
Can you cast your mind back to 2015? You were then, I believe, a detective constable with the Major Investigations team.
That's correct.
Based at Kirkcaldy Police Office. And at that time, am I right to understand that you held the role of intelligence officer?
That's correct.
What did that role involve?
Interrogating, researching the police systems.
Okay. Now, in your operational statement, I won't take you to this, but in your operational statement, you say that on the 28th of July of 2015, you were asked to research published briefings on the Police Scotland intranet and the Scottish Intelligence Database relating to threats to UK police officers.
Yes.
In your inquiry statement, you explain that you don't actually remember being asked to do that, but that your operational statement is true and accurate.
Yes.
You go on to explain that you researched police systems day in, day out, and so it could be hard to remember the specifics.
Yeah.
In your operational statement, you say that during your research you found a message published on the 16th of January 2015 from Detective Chief Constable Ian Livingston, entitled Police Personnel Threat Level Increased to Severe. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Can I ask Miss Wildgoose that we put PS 01314 on the screen? Is this the message from the 16th of January 2015 from DCC Ian Livingston that you found and that you refer to in your operational statement and your inquiry statement?
Yes.
Do we see the top line of the briefing reads Police Scotland, then there's an arrow, news, and another arrow, police personnel threat level increase to severe. Can you assist the Chair by advising where you found this briefing?
This was on the Police Scotland intranet.
Who would have access to the Police Scotland intranet?
All employees of Police Scotland.
It's police officers and civilian staff. So all police constables serving as constables within Police Scotland at the time that this briefing was issued would have had access to it
Yes.
via the intranet. Do we see that the heading is police personnel threat level increase to severe?
Yes.
And the briefing is dated the 16th of January 2015. It's in relatively short compass. Constable, can I ask you to read the briefing out?
The terror threat level specific to police personnel working in the UK has increased to severe. This means that an attack on police service personnel is highly likely. In a message to all Police Scotland officers and staff, Deputy Chief Constable Ian Livingston said it was imperative that all personnel familiarise themselves with safety advice and adhere to those measures. Further detailed guidance has been advice has been published to minimise risk and mitigate potential threats. He said the threat level regarding personnel who work from the police service in the UK has increased from substantial to severe. This means that an attack focused on the police service is assessed as highly likely. The overall threat level to the UK from international terrorism remains at severe. The purpose of this message is to raise awareness of the threat level increase, but also of the precautions all personnel must take to keep themselves and colleagues safe. There is no intelligence to suggest a specific or direct threat to Police Scotland personnel. Our officers and staff are used to confronting risk and danger and are well trained in how to protect themselves and the public. However, I wish to remind all officers and staff in the strongest possible terms that they should take sensible and proportionate steps in relation to their own personal safety and maintain a heightened awareness of safety of all colleagues. A further aid memoir, Terrorism A Safe Response, is also available and should be read by all officers and staff.
Thank you. We can take that away from the screen now. Thank you, Ms. Wildgoose. In your operational statement and your inquiry statements, you refer to another briefing that you found during the course of your research, a Stay Safe message published on the 19th of February of 2015. Do you recall that? I wonder if we can bring that up on the screen, please. It's PS 09749. We see that this briefing is entitled Stay Safe, message from Assistant Chief Constable Rory Nicholson, and it's dated the 19th of February of 2015. Is this the second message that you found during the course of your research?
Yes. Can you scroll up? Yeah, that's it.
And this is the message referred to in your statement?
Yes.
You say in your statement that, again, this was located on the Police Scotland intranet. Is that correct?
That's
and so, again, would have been available to all serving officers and civilian staff. Can I ask you simply to read the first 3 paragraphs?
Okay. As you are aware, the threat level to the UK from international terrorism remains at severe, and more specifically, the threat level to police service sector has also been raised to severe. This means an attack is highly likely, although it is uncertain what form it may take. We have witnessed the recent attacks in Copenhagen, Paris, Australia and Canada, and we can clearly recall the murder of Fusilier Lirigby on the streets of Woolwich. Intelligence suggests that the current threat comes from an opportunistic attack by self-organised Islamic extremist groups or individuals.
Thank you. So we see that this briefing, issued about a month after the previous briefing that we looked at a few moments ago, seeks to remind staff about the increase in the threat level, and it references recent events across the world related to terrorism. Is that correct?
Correct.
Both of these briefings were published on the Police Scotland intranet, which was one of the places that you carried out your research. Do I understand correctly that you also carried out a search of the Scottish intelligence database?
Mm-hmm.
Did you find anything of relevance there?
No, nothing.
I have no further questions, thank you.
Any applications in respect of this witness? No. Thank you, Constable Ferrier, for giving evidence. That's your evidence, and you're now free to go. And the next witness, Ms. Milgram.
Inspector Stephen Stewart.
Good afternoon, Inspector Stewart. You're going to be asked questions by Miss Graham at the end of the table. Before you are asked questions, would you say the words of the affirmation after me? I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham?
Thank you. You are, good afternoon, you're Inspector Stephen Stewart.
That's correct.
And we have a note of all your contact details. I won't be reading those out. But in addition, in advance of this morning, we've been sent a CV from you. Is that correct? Are you aware of that?
No.
No, all right. I think we've been sent it from Police Scotland. We'll deal with that later. Could I ask you to look, please, on the screen at Inquiry Statement SBPI number 84. Now, when I'm referring to this document, Inspector, it will come up on the screen, but when I'm referring to it, maybe only be certain paragraphs that are visible. So do you see the black folder in front of you on the desk?
Yes.
Please feel free to open it. That contains hard copies of your statement. So if you wish, at any time, feel free to look through it or refer to it. Looking at the screen for the moment, do we see that this is a witness statement from you taken by the inquiry team on the 17th of March 2022?
Yes, that's correct.
And would you look, please, at the final page? And you see the final paragraph says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website.
Yes.
And although we don't see your signature on the screen in the hard copy, am I correct in saying that you signed every page on the statement?
Yes, I've signed every page, including the last page.
Thank you. And having done so, you're happy for this statement to be published on our website?
Yes.
Thank you. Right. Now, we've heard from some other people that they also have statements given to PERC. But you were not asked to provide any operational statement, but you did provide a PERC statement, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I'll come on to that later. Thank you. You work in the ACR, the Area Control Room at Bilston Glen. Is that right?
I did at the time of the incident.
At the time in 2015?
Yes.
In May 2015. And I think in your statement at paragraph 16, you described this as a well-oiled machine. You'll see this on the screen in a moment. You'll see the last two lines. It's a well-oiled sort of machine that kicks in.
Yes.
Is that a fair description? Now, you've given us a lot of detail in your statement, and I don't want to go through that line by line, but I wonder if you would be able to explain to the chair how a call moves through the system, because in your statement, you've referred to service centre advisors, controllers, supervisors, and local officers. And I wonder if you could just help the Chair understand the way the calls move through the ACR, the Area Control Room.
Yeah, certainly. So the control room is based for the east area of Scotland at Bilston Glen, just outside of Edinburgh. The area control room is split into two parts: a service centre where calls from members of the public and partner organisations come in through 101 or 999. These calls are answered by service centre advisors who take details of the incident of the call, create an incident if required, carry out any frontline resolution or signpost to partners if appropriate. But incidents that are created for police attendance are created on the Storm Command and Control system, and then they're transferred over to the second part of the control room, which is the actual area where the dispatchers, the police controllers are, and the incidents are electronically transferred over for the controllers who have control of a specific geographical area, for example the southwest area of Edinburgh, if that's where the incident is based. And then these controllers assess the incident, look at the information, look for a resource depending on the priority of the call, and pass the incident out for local officers to attend, and that's essentially what happens in that regard. There are supervisors in the service centre and the control room who provide that oversight, and also in the east area control room there is a overview facility where myself as a duty officer would work alongside a sergeant, a research officer and a comms officer.
Sounds like a busy place.
Yes.
So calls come in from different areas in Scotland, and they come into the ACR, the control room, and you said the service centre advisors create an incident.
Yes.
And what does that actually mean?
There's a set template, and what they do is they're typing the information on the job as to just what the nature of the call is to the police. So if it was a missing person, they take details from the person who'd phoned in, and they would populate that screen with the relevant information, which would then be used as an incident to transfer across to the control room side of the centre. And
you've spoke about if it's for police attendance, so if the police have to actually attend the incident, then you said it goes to Storm and on to police controllers.
Yes, so Storm is the command and control system that's there. So an incident gets created on Storm and gets transferred across to the control room. So it's an electronic transfer of a job. So if I was typing information on, if I took the call from the member of the public, was typing information on, it would get transferred to you as a controller. If there was a need for police to attend, you would assess the incident, decide which resources you were going to send, and then you would radio up the police officers on the ground or supervisors to say you had an incident regarding a missing person in the southeast area of Edinburgh, and you look for resources to dispatch to that.
And when you talk about resources, what do you mean?
Police resources, so local policing resources, it could be any kind of resources, community policing resources, response officers, CID officers, plainclothes or specialist resources, depending on the nature of the incident.
And what are specialist resources?
So I would say specialist resources are, there's a range of specialist resources. I would describe them as roads policing officers, armed response vehicles, public order officers, mounted officers, the force helicopter, negotiators, dog units.
And when you say armed response vehicle, is that commonly shortened to ARV?
Yes, that's correct.
And then the controllers consider resources and maybe contact local officers?
Yes, that's correct.
So you mentioned supervisors who have oversight. What was your job in the ACR that day on the 3rd of May 2015?
So I was the duty officer, so I had overview of the whole service centre and the area control room. So my responsibility was to make sure that calls were sort of resourced and attended by local policing officers, by specialist resources if required.
So you were in charge of the team of service centre advisors
Yep.
who were receiving the calls, and also the controllers
Yes,
and supervisors?
yes,
Right. And you were called the duty officer.
yes, that's correct.
So were you in overall charge of the ACR on the 3rd of May
Yes.
2015? Thank you. I want to ask you about something you say in paragraph 10 of your statement, please. And you talk about grading types of calls, grade 1 and grade 2 and 3.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could explain to the chair what's involved in that process.
Okay, so when I worked there, the calls were graded, and they were grade 1, grade 2 and 3. That's since changed to immediate priority and routine, I think it is. I've not worked there for a while. So your grade 1 calls were your urgent emergency calls that required immediate attendance within a very short period of time. So they were your high-end emergency calls requiring an immediate response. Grade 2 were still needed a prompt response, but not necessarily an immediate dispatch. And grade 3 tended to be more routine calls, where the risk was not so significant, and it could take they could be attended further down the line when resources were available or it suited the individual.
Could you give the chair an example of a grade 1 call that had immediate priority?
Yeah, so it could be a high-risk missing person, it could be a robbery, it could be the incident that I'm here for today, it could be a fire call, it could be a road traffic accident where someone had been knocked down, a serious incident that required an immediate police response.
And could you give him an example of a grade 2 call?
Yes, it could be a housebreaking where the perpetrators had left the scene and the people were safe, but it needed a quick response for the members of the public.
If someone phones in saying they've seen someone with a knife, is that always a grade 1 call, or could it be a grade 2 call?
I would suggest that would always be a grade 1 call, depending on the information that was passed. But if there was any threat, risk or harm, then I would suggest that it would always be a grade 1 call.
Does it make any difference to the grading if that person with the knife is damaging cars as opposed to threatening people?
I think someone in possession of a knife is always going to be a grade 1 call, just because of the potential risks associated with someone having a weapon in a public place.
Thank you. Can you explain to the chair how they're dealt with? So a grade 1 call, first of all, how is a grade 1 call? What's the response to that type of call?
So it would be an immediate response. So a grade 1 call, what would happen is the information would be phoned in by a member of the public. The details would be noted or recorded on the storm command and control system by the call taker, the service centre, member of staff, and then that information would get transferred very quickly to the controller side of the control room, and then they would put the call out to local policing officers almost immediately. So local officers, local supervisors were aware of the urgent call in their area. They would look for resources to dispatch to that grade 1 call.
If it's a grade 2 call, how does the response differ?
The grade 2 would be taken in the same way, but when it reached the controller, the controller would be looking at it, making that assessment of risk, understanding what the call encapsulated, and then they would allocate resources. So they might not allocate a resource immediately, but they would be looking to allocate a resource. They may allocate a resource immediately if I had a resource free.
So what factors, you've talked about assessing risk and you've talked about allocating resources immediately, what factors will the controller take into account when they're deciding how to respond to the call? Excuse me.
I mean, I would say threat, risk and harm, threat to members of the public, threat to individuals, threat to people in the vicinity, and then the level of risk. So if there was weapons involved, the level of risk would be higher potentially, and then the overall harm that could be done. So a threat, risk and harm risk assessment is probably quite a good way to describe it.
And largely it's risk to people or threat to people.
Yes.
So if there's a difference between if there's multiple calls coming in and different service centre advisors grade them differently, perhaps one or two, how is that situation resolved?
Okay. So from my recollection there, I would hope that the jobs would be linked. Certainly an overview if there was grade 1 calls coming into a certain area in respect of a specific incident, they would be flagged up to me in the overview, and if something was misgraded, a 2 as opposed to a 1, I would still hope that would be picked up just because of the proximity.
So where there's a variation, you will go with the grade 1 grading rather than the grade 2?
Yeah.
So if we hear that a call was graded grade 2, but an officer took the view it should be a grade 1, there wouldn't be any problem with treating it in that way?
No, I mean, a call can be upgraded as well. So if it came in as a grade 2 and then there was additional information that came in to the service centre, text would be added on the incident, sort of demonstrating the additional sort of risk factor. So you can increase a grade as well. So it's possible to do that.
And is that something that you would have authority to do or to control?
The controller would do that. I think the service centre advisor could actually change the grading of it as well if they felt that it merited that sort of more immediate response.
So it's not necessary for someone in your position as duty officer to alter the grading?
No, I wouldn't alter the grading of a call. I wouldn't think so.
And if we hear that Acting Sergeant Maxwell upgraded a call from grade 2 to grade 1, is there any difficulty with that?
So was Acting Sergeant Maxwell a local policing officer or a controller?
He's not a controller, he's a
Yeah.
local officer.
Yeah. Well, he couldn't physically upgrade a call from a grade 2 to a grade 1. He might intimate that he thought it was a more serious incident or a more serious call, and there would be absolutely nothing wrong with that local supervisor on the ground making that call.
Thank you. Could I ask you to look at paragraph 45, please? We'll see this on the screen. As part of the process of taking your statement, you were asked to look at a transmission where it said there was a transmission from Acting Police Sergeant Scott Maxwell. Control from 411, I want all units to attend that, bearing in mind officer safety, an ARV and a dog as well. So he's a local officer from Kirkcaldy, and you're at Bilston Glen in the control room. But you've no difficulty with him making the request for an ARV or a dog unit as well?
No, I mean, he's a local supervisor on the ground. I would certainly take into consideration his views and thoughts.
And is there any question about the authority that he has to request an ARV?
I mean, he can request an ARV, but ultimately on that day it was myself as a trained tactical firearms commander who would be the individual who authorised and deployed armed ARVs to an incident.
Tell us what a trained tactical firearms officer does.
So, as a trained tactical firearms commander, I went on a course and I was accredited, went through a training process, and I was in the control room on a 24/7 basis. We always had an ITFC as the duty officer. They went hand in hand, because you were that initial sort of response or assessment for serious incidents involving firearms or weapons or violence. So if an incident came into the control room in terms of a live incident, someone in possession of a handgun, someone in possession of a knife or an axe, I would make that determination based on my training as to whether or not it was a declared firearms incident, and then I would deploy ARV resources to deal with that and brief them on the way and advise them of tactics and sort of control these specialist resources to the incident.
So you've had special training to allow you to become a tactical firearms commander.
Yes.
And that provides you with the authority to deploy ARVs to an incident.
Yes.
But is that specialist training that you've had that provides you with that authority?
Yes.
It's not something that any officer has the authority to deploy.
No, just myself. So the officer who's said this is obviously looking for sort of additional resources to attend based on the information he's received.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by looking at some enhanced video timeline, some footage that we have, and this will allow you to hear the first contact from the control room to the officers on the 3rd of May 2015. And you'll see on the screen, just briefly to explain to you, you'll see that on the top left-hand side there's a real time clock in grey, which says 7:16 in the morning and 22 seconds. And beneath that there are some buttons which you will see light up when a call is received into the control room. At the moment the 999 call button is lit up. On the left-hand side at the bottom of the screen we see some dash cam footage which has been cross-checked with the real time clock. It's taken from a vehicle which is on Henry Road. And then on the right-hand side we see footage from a CCTV camera positioned in a nearby pub called Gallagher's Pub. As we play this, you're going to hear the audio. I appreciate that at this moment in time you would have been in the control room in Bilston Glen. But we're going to listen to the audio on this. While we do that, I wonder if I could also ask you to look at a spreadsheet which is on the table just to your left. And I'd like to explain to you now, you'll have this in front of you throughout my questions to you, but let me just explain what we have in front of you. You'll see on the left hand side there is a column which gives video timings. You see that? It
Yes.
starts at 07:09:20, so that's 9 minutes past 7 in the morning and 20 seconds. And the first line is 7:09:20 to 7:09:33. Do you see that?
Yes.
That's page 1 of the spreadsheet. And as you go along that row, you will also see a description of visible events in the video. And then there's a small thumbnail description given of what can be seen on the footage. So this is tied to what you'll see on the screen. So if you look towards 7:16 and 22 seconds, you'll see that in the second column it says for audio timings, you'll see that it says there was a call from Con 1 that says control for 41 Charlie. Do you see that?
Yes.
So you should, when we play this tape, you should be able to hear that. And then at 7:16:29, you should hear a call from PC Ashley Tomlinson, which says go ahead. And then 7:16:32, you'll see that Con 1 come on, and there's another longer description given of what's said. And we understand Con 1 to be control, but I'll be asking you some questions about it once we've listened to this. So I'm going to ask Miss Wildgoose to play from 16:22 to 16:42. Thank you.
Control for 41 Charlie. Right. I need you to divert to Henry Road, a disturbance ongoing, male armed with a knife. African looking male chasing someone that may be carrying a knife. Described as big with muscles, about.
So we went slightly over that time there, but were you able to hear that,
Yes.
Inspector? And did you recognise where it says Con 1 on the spreadsheet? Do you recognise that that's from the control room?
Yes, that would have been the controller who was covering the area at the time.
And that's the control room that you're the duty officer of?
Yes.
And are all the calls through, we've heard all the calls from and to the control room are recorded?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Right. If you could just give me a moment. Right. Do you know from listening to that who made the call from Con 1 at 7:16:32?
I think it would have been PC Scott Masterton.
Scott Masterton.
I think it was Scott Masterton, was my recollection.
Was he Con 1?
I think he was.
Can I ask you, as you look at the words written down, it says, I need you to divert to Henry Road, a disturbance ongoing, male armed with a knife, African-looking male chasing, someone may be carrying a knife, described as big with muscles, about 6 foot tall, wearing a white t-shirt and dark coloured jeans. There's another job coming in about it, stand by. I wonder if we could listen to that again, please. 7:16:32, please, Miss Wildgoose. Thank you. I'm going to be asking you a question about the words, an African-looking male chasing, someone may be carrying a knife. So when you're listening to it, will you listen to those words, please? Thank you. So this will start at 32.
Right. I need you to divert to Henry Road, a disturbance ongoing, male armed with a knife. African looking male chasing someone that may be carrying a knife. Described as big with muscles, about 6 foot tall, wearing a white t-shirt and dark coloured jeans. There's another job coming in about stand by.
Thank you. There seems to be quite a big gap between a knife, African-looking male chasing, and then a big gap before the words someone may be carrying a knife. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Yeah. So this isn't a call saying someone's chasing people with a knife. It's chasing, a male chasing, and then someone may be carrying a knife. I'm trying to understand what that would, what that message means.
I mean, I've not heard this message until just there. So it's obviously describing the the male who's involved in the incident, it suggests there that it's chasing someone, but it doesn't say who may be carrying a knife. And in the description that the controller has obviously, they must have read from the incident or been passed about build, height and clothing. And then obviously another incident is coming in, a similar incident or another call coming in, I think was what he's saying. Stand by, and I would presume that he was saying stand by because he was going to look at the next incident that was coming in to see if it matched or reflected or was linked or related to it.
Do you think this has the potential to be confusing about whether the person has a knife or the person's chasing someone with a knife?
I don't know. For me, the key thing is that someone may be carrying a knife. I suppose it could be confusing if there is a pause, but the way I read it is that there's a male walking, and it talks about him being armed with a knife, and then chasing someone may be carrying a knife. So I suppose I can understand what you're saying by that.
Can I just be clear about what Control 1 is doing here? Is he reading the text that's come through from the other side?
Yes, I think he is, sir. I think he will be reading that. He'll be reading the incident and then speaking out over the radio to the officers, passing the description of what he's seen written down. If that makes sense.
Thank you. You've talked, can we go back to your statement, please, paragraph 11? You see here you're talking about the 3rd of May 2015.
Yes.
And you talk about having specific responsibility, so line 4 of that paragraph, specific responsibility for control and coordination of specialist resources, which include firearms, dog unit. And I'm wondering if you could help the chair in explaining what factors you would have regard to when you choose to deploy firearms or a dog unit.
Again, it would be threat, risk and harm facing members of the public. That would be my consideration. But I would use a model, a national decision-making model, which as a firearms commander I was trained to use to understand an incident, what was happening, what the threats could possibly be, who was involved in the incident. It's about making an initial risk assessment, a threat assessment, which is prioritised, and then I work through various sections of it, covering sort of policy and powers, the criteria for the deployment of armed officers, whether or not that's met, and then I would work through various tactical options that would be available to me. So I'd work through that model as information was coming in, and sometimes that would change maybe actions that I would take.
And so when you say it could change, are you keeping this under constant review depending on the information being fed to you?
Yes, they talk about spinning the model all the time and it updates all the time. So if new information was to come to light that increased the threat or negated a threat, then I would obviously have to consider that in my working strategy, the way that I was prioritising the threats.
So you will be adapting your strategy depending on the information coming in?
Yes, and it could change several times in an incident, over the course of an incident, if it was a longer incident.
Thank you. Would you look at paragraph 13, please? You've talked about the armed response vehicles, ARV crews, and you've said in that paragraph, I'll give you, please feel free to look through it, that they were available in Edinburgh, Stirling and Edinburgh Airport, and we're talking about the 3rd of May 2015.
That's correct.
There was no ARV available in Fife.
Not on that morning, no.
And can you explain why there wasn't one there?
It would just been to do with armed policing resources, how they resourced the ARVs on that particular shift.
Is there often one in Glenrothes?
Yeah, there is a car in Glenrothes sometimes, but not on this particular day.
You say a car, is that an ARV?
Sorry, yes, an ARV.
No, I don't want to make any mistakes. How long would it take if you needed an ARV in Fife, and particularly in Kirkcaldy? How long would it take for an ARV to respond if you were calling them from the area control room in Bilston Glen and they were based in Edinburgh?
I mean, I looked at this at the time and shortly thereafter, but it was, it's about 27 miles by road from Edinburgh, Fettes to Kirkcaldy. So it was a Sunday morning, so they would have been able to travel quite quickly, but it was still going to take 25 minutes. Stirling's probably about 40 miles, I think. So again, there's that 30 to 35 minute travelling time. And even Dundee, which wasn't in my area, but if necessary I could have gone to Dundee. I mean, that's still 30 miles from Kirkcaldy. So the timescales of ARVs attending Kirkcaldy on that morning, at a minimum, would have been about 25 minutes to 30 minutes, I would suggest.
But Edinburgh was the closest location
Yes.
where an ARV was available.
And in Edinburgh as well, there was a OFC as part of that resource, so that's an operational firearms commander, so that would be the individual that I would liaise with directly in terms of briefing and deploying and tactics that I wanted to be carried out on the ground. So the OFC, it would be my preference that the OFC would go with his or her resources.
And is that the person you had contact with on the 3rd of May that year?
Yes, it was my communications officer in the control room that made them aware of an incident that was happening in Kirkcaldy at the time.
And what's her name?
That was Michelle Hutchison, was the communications officer at the time.
Thank you. Could I ask you to look at paragraphs 16 and 17 of your statement? You mention the national decision-making model.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could explain to the chair a little bit about this. I think we may have a diagram that we could show as you go through this, which Mrs. Wildgoose will put on the screen. So it's my understanding, and you'll see at the top of the page, PS 13182, National Decision Model, PDF. Do you see that?
Yes.
And there's a diagram. I wonder if you could talk, do you recognise this diagram?
Yes.
Yes. And I wonder if you could talk through it to explain it to the chair, please.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this is a model that police officers across Scotland use. It's not just myself as a firearms commander, but operational officers, detectives, everybody should use this as a sound basis for sort of decision making. So right at the very, very top, it's got gather information and intelligence. So in any kind of incident that I would deal with, I would be looking for information that was coming in terms of phone calls, 999 calls, to try and build a picture of what was actually happening at the incident. Any intelligence as well that was held on police systems. So if we knew it was an individual who was involved in the incident, we could look at intelligence to see where that person stayed, if they had markers for violence, if they were firearms, known to carry firearms. So you're building that picture about the incident that helps to inform your decision making. It helps you move on to the next part, which is your threat and risk assessment and your initial working strategy, as I would call it. So with that, you've looked at I would use as part of the gathering information intelligence, I would look at the victim, location, time, proximity, and the subject in terms of who they were, what their capabilities were, what their identification was, and what their possible intent was. And then you move on to the threat that's being posed. So in terms of the threat, I would be looking at who was making the threat, what it entailed, who was likely to be at risk, who was immediately at risk, and that helped you to develop an initial working strategy which was prioritised. So I would rank them in priority of who I thought was most at risk, and I would have to, my working strategy would have to reflect that. So normally at the top of a working strategy, it would be any victim or potential victim, then it would be public in the vicinity, and then it would be local policing officers who were attending, if they were attending, and then it might be emergency service responders, armed policing, and then it might be the subject below that. And you'd rank them in that order. But if information and intelligence came in, it might change the circumstances. Your working strategy would then go on to cover, you wanted to locate, identify, locate and contain the individual, stop them, search them, recover any weapon, and then return to normality. So that working threat and risk assessment would change throughout the course of an incident if it was longer.
So as you're working out your strategy, more information could come into you that means you want to alter or amend that strategy.
Yeah. I mean, I've mentioned the subject might be at the bottom of the strategy, but that might change should the individual decide to sit down and hold a gun or a knife or anything to themselves and be a threat to themselves. So they would. The strategy would then change, and the situation's
evolving depending on the. So at any time more information comes in, you go back to look at your strategy again.
Yeah.
And then once you've developed your strategy, before any other new information comes in, you have here consider powers and policy. What does that mean?
So you're looking at whether or not the criteria for the deployment of officers, armed officers, is met, and that's either a yes or a no. And there's a definition that we learned, and you have it on an aid memoir, and then you're looking at what offences has been committed, what powers you have to arrest someone or search an individual. You're looking at a proportionate response in terms of force. You're looking at it, just what actions you would take in terms of that, whether it's proportionate, lawful, accountable, necessary, and least intrusive. So you would work your way through your powers and policies.
So once you've got your strategy, you're thinking about, in some ways, the legal position and the policies. Would that be Police Scotland policies?
Yes.
Would it cover standard operating procedures?
Yes, you would take them into consideration.
We may hear some of them are called SOPs or SOPs.
Yes.
And what are standard operating procedures?
It's the guidance to operational officers.
And is that officers who are local officers who might attend an incident?
It could be guidance to any officers. There's SOPs for everything in Police Scotland, so it would be. And
is everyone who's a police officer trained in those SOPs?
Yes, so SOPs are on the police intranet, and they're refreshed and updated and published as new information comes in. So the expectation is that you would have to keep up to date with SOPs.
And so against that background, again, assuming no further information's come in, if we look at the next arrow, it leads to identify options and contingencies. What does that mean?
So that's you're identifying your sort of tactical options, what's available to you, and there's generic options that help you in your decision-making process. So you might decide to wait and try and gather more information or intelligence, understand what's happening. That might be a course of action which is appropriate for a specific incident. Then you could take mitigating action, and that might be removing members of the public or witnesses from a location to try and reduce risk to them. Then there's observations, and it could be visual observations and physical observations, getting eyes on a person, CCTV if there was any, and then investigative assessment is another one. There's a list of 7 of them. Investigative assessment, and that's when you're going forward to look at the situation, to understand what's going on, to get that information fed back to you, which again all feeds into your decision-making process. And then there's containment, communication, and then decisive action, what you're going to do. So you've got a list of 7 generic options is what I was trained in, and you use what's most appropriate, or you could use 6 out of the 7 or 3 out of the 7, depending on which most is appropriate. And then you have your contingencies.
Sorry to interrupt. Would decisive action include restraint?
It would be, I would say, decisive action would be intercept the subject, challenge the subject, and if arrest the subject. It wouldn't necessarily be restraint, but it could be if a subject struggled.
And that would be number 7 on the list?
Yeah.
And then it says take action and review what happened.
Yeah, you would put your tactical options. You were going to decide what you would do. So I would brief the armed response officers, tell them what I wanted them to do. So we would take that course of action and try and understand if it worked, whether it was successful, or when maybe needed to do something else. And that was the important part, to make sure that you were continuing to take the right course of action.
But at any time, more information could come in, which then means you go back to the beginning.
Yeah, and you just spin it all the time, and at the centre of it is the code of ethics, which is what should underpin your decision making and your practice.
And that's the code of ethics that applies to all police officers?
Yes.
Could I ask you to go back to your statement, please, and look at paragraph 18? And you talk about specialist resources, and you, towards the latter half of that, you say they needed to make an initial assessment on attending the scene, feedback to me, and then that would inform my decision-making process, which would then determine whether or not I deployed armed officers or dog units or whoever else. Can you explain a little bit more about this paragraph?
Yes, for me, it was probably important that the officers that were attending the incident made that initial dynamic risk assessment and fed back what was actually happening on the ground in front of them, what the threat was to them or members of the public, whether or not the individual continued to have a weapon or not. And again, that would all feed into the level of threat that they were facing, and whether or not there was a requirement for specialist officers, armed ARVs or dogs to be deployed.
So a moment ago, when we were looking at the national decision-making model, information on the scene from the local officers could be information that's feeding into that national decision-making model.
Information from the scene is probably vital to come back to me as a commander in the control room. There was no CCTV, open space CCTV covering Kirkcaldy at that time. So sometimes in Edinburgh you can actually see the CCTV, you can see what's happening in front of you, and that helps you. So you need that professional eyes on, that assessment of risk and threat that all officers should be able to provide back to the control room.
So just to be clear, Inspector, although we've seen CCTV from Gallagher's pub off Hayfield Road, that's not CCTV that was available to you in Bilston Glen?
No, there was no CCTV available on the morning of the incident that covered that incident.
So you relied on officers at the scene to share information with you?
Yes, that would, yeah, I wanted that information.
And you said that was vital. How is that information shared from officers at the scene?
So it would be an update, a radio update to the control room, so it would be fed back to the controller, and that would be broadcast for the attention of sort of other officers who were attending the incident to make them aware of what was going on. But it would also be shared with supervisors, local supervisors, control room supervisors, and myself as well.
So we've heard about a talk group within the airwave system, Kirkcaldy 1, and is that the system that you, or the group that would be allowed to communicate with you in the control room?
Yeah, so if local officers were on Kirkcaldy 1 and they radioed back on Kirkcaldy 1, everybody who was monitoring Kirkcaldy 1 would be able to hear that update and understand what was going on.
And that including the area control room?
Yes, because we were then monitoring Kirkcaldy 1.
As well as other officers in the area?
Yes.
Who are monitoring, and everyone can hear those messages?
They should be able to hear these messages.
And the words you use there in paragraph 18 are initial assessment, and then when you described it, you talked about a dynamic risk assessment. Are they the same things?
Yeah. So I would say that they for me they are. It's that the initial attending at the incident, what's in front of you. So it's probably the same. I would use it as the same. So it's the initial, when you arrive there, make that dynamic risk assessment to understand what's going on and feed it back.
And the feedback is the call on the police radio to control room?
Yes.
So that's what you're waiting for?
Yes.
Can I ask you now to listen to some more audio with the enhanced video timeline? We're going to move on to phase 2, which you will see on the spreadsheet in front of you. We're going to play from 07/17/04 to 07/20/12. 07/17/04 is part of phase 2. You'll see it on page 2 of the spreadsheet.
Okay.
And it'll start almost immediately when we start playing this at 7/17/04, Con 1 it says on page 2 of the spreadsheet. Do you have that?
Yes.
And you should be able to hear the call that's described in the column. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's another grade 1 call coming in for the Victoria Road, Kirkcaldy, male armed with a knife. Male in possession of a large knife, a black male wearing white t-shirt and jacket, walking along the street with a large knife in his right hand, about a 9-inch blade.
Control from 411, all units defend that, bear in mind officer safety. There's an ARV and a dog as well, please.
Control from 41 Alpha.
Go ahead.
And he's outside Gallagher's pub.
We're heading there. That's 2 separate locuses. We'll go to Victoria Road before Henry Road. The large call can be monitored by Romeo Victor.
Roger.
Papa Whiskey 101 and 104 also Taylor.
Alpha Control from 41 Alpha. Can we try to get house numbers of the 2 informants, please?
Roger, 1 is... The second caller is from That's a further call advising the male is in Hayfield Road near to Gallagher's pub.
That's the take a bit more sense. I think the Victoria Road call, Locus, is probably incorrect.
Control from 401. Is there any update of ARV or dog units over?
I believe a dog unit is en route.
From overview, we're organising an ARV as well. Stand by.
Papa Control from 41 Alpha.
Go ahead.
Victoria Road probably was taken Locus, Hayfield Road.
Roger, Hayfield Road. That was the last place he was seen, near Gallagher's pub.
Sure, that's us approaching Locus.
And that's another call saying he was seen walking in the direction of the hospital in the middle of the road.
Yes, yes. That's on Hayfield Road heading in that direction.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's a number of airwaves transmissions that we can hear. Does that go to all units who are linked into the talk group who are en route to Hayfield Road?
Yeah, if that was broadcast on Kirkcaldy 1, they would hear that.
Do you see at 7:19:17, so that's on page 2, if you could go back for a minute. Con 1, you told us earlier that was Scott Masterton who's speaking.
Yes.
Who was speaking when Con 2 was played?
So that's Michelle Hutchison, I believe, my communications officer, in overview at the time.
So that's the lady that you mentioned earlier today.
Yes.
And do we see at 7:17:23? And you'll see that that's on page 2 of the spreadsheet,
Yes.
that there is a transmission from Acting Police Sergeant Scott Maxwell, which says, I want all units to attend that, bearing in mind officer safety. Is there an ARV and a dog as well, please? Is that him asking control room for an update effectively on the ARV and the dog?
I think he's initially requesting it there, and then I think later on he's maybe asking for an update.
So the initial request from Maxwell to control is at 7:17:23.
Yes.
Thank you. And then at 7:19 and 17 seconds, which is just lower down the page, do we see Scott Masterton as Control 1 saying, I believe a dog unit is en route?
Yes.
And is that the control room sharing that information over the airwaves with the officers?
Yes.
And Con 2, Michelle Hutchinson, at 7:19:23, she is then saying, be aware, organising an ARV as well, stand by.
Yes.
And she again, from the control room, is sharing that information over
Yeah.
the airwaves transmission with the officers
Yes,
who
that's
are en
correct.
route. So before, I'd like to move on to phase 3, please. Oh, well, no, sorry, I should ask first of all. There was an issue about the locus and whether there was a mistake about the locus or where the officers were to attend. Were you aware in your role of any confusion at that stage about where the locus was?
No, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, I'd been elsewhere in the control room and I ran up to the overview, so I probably tune in probably about 07:18 to 7:20 is when I'm in the overview. So I hadn't heard on the morning.
So 0718, that would have been at a time, maybe at the... do we see that on page 2? 0718, about 2/3 of the way down the page.
Yeah.
Where did you join?
I don't know the specific time that I joined, but I didn't hear any of the transmissions that had been on Kirkcaldy 1 until I jumped into the overview and started to make an assessment of what was going on. My comms officer was listening to the talk group. We were looking at the incidents, the information on the incidents, and I was running through my model, and then just before I transmitted, around 7:20:13, that was when I actually jumped onto Kirkcaldy 1 talk group.
I'll come on to that in a moment, thank you. When it says all units are attending, what does that actually mean to a police officer?
So that suggests to me that the supervisor on the ground is having all resources that are available to attend that call. So it would be several vehicles, I would imagine.
All resources being police officers?
Yes.
All who are available in the area?
Yeah. So it would be the response team probably, and anyone else who was nearby.
Thank you. In your position in the control room, would you have any expectation or information about the number of units that would be attending?
In the control room we can see, yes, because the controller's got responsibility for looking at the resources, looking after them. So there's a mapping system, so they can see on the mapping system which resources would attend, and so the controller would know who was free, who was involved with another incident, who they had to tell to break away to attend an incident.
So that's also something that you have some control over?
Yes, yeah.
I'd like to move on to the first call that you made over the airwaves transmission. So this is on page 3 of the spreadsheet, and you've already identified it starts at 07:20:13, and this is phase 3. Now this is a call that lasts from 13 seconds to 21 seconds. We've heard evidence last week that the timings are accurate to within 1 second. So what I'd like to do now is play that airwaves transmission, please.
Inspector Stewart, area control room to the set attending. I'm monitoring this obviously from an ARV perspective. If you get sightings of the mail, you need to make an initial assessment yourself and feedback to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Thank you. So you refer to an initial assessment,
Yeah.
and when we looked at your statement, you refer to that as a dynamic risk assessment.
Yes.
And that's what you've described earlier for us.
Mm-hmm.
That was your expectation,
Yes.
that would be done by the first officers at the scene.
Yes.
And you then talk about feedback, and again, you've described to us that that's transmitting information back to you.
Yes.
And that allows you then to engage with the national decision-making model process
Yes.
that you've talked about. Now, in your, well, we'll come back to this in a moment, but in your statement, I don't think we need to go to it straight away, you talk about a stay safe message.
Yes.
Can you explain to the chair what you mean by a stay safe message?
Yes. It's a message. It's a message that is given to officers who are attending an incident involving firearms or weapons or violence, and it is about that. The need to keep yourself safe. In fact, it's for every officer. Every officer should know what a stay safe message is, and there's trainings and briefings on it. And it is about attending an incident where there is potential risk, and it's above all keeping yourself safe, considering your safe approaches, any kind of safe exit, use of cover, whether or not you actually deploy or go, and then there's different parts of it. See, tell and act. So see is you're looking at providing that sort of visual update as to what's actually happening right in front of you, what the threat is a male in possession of a knife or a handgun, what are they doing, what are your immediate concerns. Tell is the description, where they currently are, what they're doing, what the risks are, whether or not you think specialist officers would be required to deal with that situation. And then the final part is updating the control room, updating your colleagues as to what's happening, whether you're going to take any sort of action at the time, or just observe or contain, or if you are going to take any action, if it's safe to do so.
So let me just go through that with you a little more slowly. As the officers are approaching the incident, they've been provided with information over the airwaves transmission. And on this occasion, it was about a man with a knife.
Yep.
And so that is information that they're taking in through the airwaves.
Yes.
And in addition to that, you then said you're looking at your approaches and your exits. So again, is that information that they are absorbing as they approach the scene?
It's information I would suspect them to be absorbing. I mean, they should be thinking about that when they're going to an incident. I can only speak for myself. I can't speak about the people who attended the incident. But if I was going to an incident like that, I would be thinking about these things.
Escape routes, and you said use cover. What does that mean?
I mean, that's it's primarily if it was a firearms incident, you would want to stay behind, out of sight, behind cover, so you couldn't be shot at effectively. But again, if you were attending an incident with a knife, it might be that you attend in your vehicle and you stay in your vehicle, you get out and you stand behind the vehicle, that kind of thing.
But at that stage, all options are open to the officers. It's for them to make that initial assessment.
Yeah, and we're all trained through officer safety training to sort of make assessments like that.
Quickly?
Quickly, whether it's a dynamic risk assessment, whether or not it's safe to go forward and deal with someone, or you need to wait until additional resources come, and that could be the sort of local officers or specialist officers if they arrive.
So one of the options for officers is just to wait and do nothing.
One of the options is, yep. But yeah, attending officers could do that. Wait is one of the sort of generic tactical options that I could have in the control room as well. But I felt on this particular incident, waiting wasn't an option on that morning, because someone was reported to be carrying a knife in a public place at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we were just unsure what was going to happen. So
it wasn't an option for you.
Yes.
It wasn't a grade 3 call where you have the option to wait and do something later, or even a grade 2 or 3 call. It was a grade 1 call, so you were going to do something straight away.
Yes.
Yeah. But those options, such as wait, remained possible for the officers who were going to attend.
Yes, I mean, they could have paused and assessed the circumstances, wait for backup, I suppose, and shouted back to the control room to say, this is what we can see in front of us. This is what's happening. We're being threatened. We're not being threatened. Person's in possession of a knife. Person's not in possession of a knife. There's no members of the public nearby. We feel it's safe to approach that kind of thing.
And what you're describing is part of the initial assessment, and then the feed, you expected that to be fed back to the control room?
Yes.
Can you give us give the chair any indication of the length of time that type of dynamic risk assessment would take to carry out?
It just depends on the circumstances. I mean, it is a case of driving up and seeing the individual in front of you, maybe from a distance, to and looking to see what they're doing, what they're in possession of, what they're behaving like. It's that it could be seconds.
Are calls about knife incidents common in that area, in Kirkcaldy, in Fife?
Calls to knife incidents are common across Police Scotland, so local officers do attend knife calls on a regular basis and make sort of risk assessments when they go.
When you say regular, can you help us understand what that means? Is it weekly, daily?
Across Police Scotland, I would say daily knife calls. I couldn't say for certainty across Kirkcaldy.
In Bilston Glen in 2015, how regular did you have knife calls coming in?
I would make assessments in relation to knife calls regularly, violent calls, calls with weapons. It was a daily or a shift occurrence normally when I was in the control room.
How many shifts are in a day?
3, so early, night and back shift and night shift.
Thank you. Did you get any feedback?
I didn't on that morning.
Nothing at all?
No.
If we hear evidence that one or other of the officers didn't hear the message that you transmitted at 7:20:13, what was your expectation in terms of them doing an initial assessment anyway, even if they hadn't heard that message?
I suppose I would have expected them to go and if someone was reported to be in possession of a knife, to stop short, slow up, and provide that update, not just to myself in the control room, but to colleagues that were attending as well, and to supervisors as well. But I don't know the circumstances of that day. They may have turned a corner and been confronted by the male at that time, almost an immediate sort of confrontation, because they were looking for him at the time. So I don't know the circumstances of how quickly it happened for them.
In terms of your expectation that the local officers will carry out an initial assessment, is it your understanding that all police officers are trained in carrying out these types of assessment?
Yes, from sort of officer safety training, I know that we do the NDM and we do knife scenarios. We've done it for years and years. Personally, when I've attended officer safety training, so that is taught and trained in your yearly refresher training.
And so, insofar as we see your message from 7:20:13, would it be fair to say that that's really a reminder of what they're already trained to do?
Yes, but it was important that they got that reminder, because I would have imagined that they would be rushing to the incident. So it was important for me I felt important to get that back out to them, just so they took that on board, and that's what they did.
Is that something you often do, just provide a reminder to officers when they're responding to an incident?
Yeah, the control room would do that, yes.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to phase 3.
You used an acronym, I think it was MDN or something. I think the stenographer had difficulty picking it up.
Oh, sorry, NDM, so that's the National Decision Model that we discussed.
Earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to phase 3, please. And this, we've already heard your first message. So that's from 7:20:13 seconds. It's on page 3 of the spreadsheet. And I'd like we'll play this in a moment, and you'll see I'm going to play it for a few seconds to cover an entry which you'll see at 7:20:23, where it says police van stops on Hayfield Road within FOV, which is field of vision of CCTV. Do you see that?
Yes.
So I think we'll go back slightly, Miss Wildgoose, just to the initial call, the start of phase 3, 7:20:13. You've just listened to that a moment ago, and then we'll play that, and I'll ask Miss Wildgoose to stop. Thank you.
Inspector Stewart, area control room to the set attending. I'm monitoring this obviously from an ARV perspective. If you get sightings of the mail, you need to make an initial assessment yourself and feedback to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Okay, we'll pause it there, please. And did you see the police van coming round the roundabout and turning right into what we've heard is Hayfield Road?
Yes, I did.
And did you see it stopping at 7:20:23?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you also see on the screen, Inspector, I've not referred you to this previously, there's a reconstruction tile at the top in the middle of the screen, and we've heard evidence from a company called ALI who have reconstructed what can be determined from the CCTV. And you'll see that there's a bus stop shown on the reconstruction tile with now at 7:20:31 a white van displayed, stopped there, and then 2 blue dots near to that.
Yes, I see that.
And this is now 7:20:31. I'd like to go back to 7:20:23 if that's possible. And maybe go back just slightly, sorry. That's fine, thanks. And then we'll watch this again, and you will also see not only the van on the CCTV at the bottom of the screen, but you'll see the van appear in the reconstruction tile. And I wonder if you could just play that so that the inspector can watch this, please.
Stewart, area control room to the set attending.
So you see the
I'm
van
monitoring this obviously from
turning round.
an ARV perspective. If you get sightings of the mail,
Stop.
you need to make an...
Thank you. And so that's stopped now at 7:20:23, and the van appears to have stopped at the bus stop. And the chair has evidence before him, and by way of statements, it says those were the first officers on the scene in that van. And then I'd like to, what I'm going to ask Miss Wildgoose now is to carry on playing until we're at 7:20 and 42 seconds. You can watch it on the screen, you can follow it on the spreadsheet. If you wish me to play it again, we can do that, and we'll carry on till 42 seconds.
Initial assessment yourself and feedback to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Control for Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it.
It's described as male, black, well-built.
Thank you. And do we see at this moment 7:20, well, it's moved on from 42 to 43, but we see the emergency status button has been pressed. It's a red button with the name Peyton on it.
Yes.
So by 7:20 and 42, it's just flipped over to 43, that we can hear that we see on the spreadsheet it says PC Alan Peyton's emergency status is turned on, and that is, we've heard that when his emergency button is turned on. Is that something that you can tell when you're in the control room?
Yes, it flashes up on the console that I have in front of me, and you hear it in your headphones as well that the emergency button's been activated.
We've heard that the phones vibrate. Is that something you can tell from the control room?
I can't recall. I can't remember.
But it acknowledges it in the control room,
yes,
that an emergency button's been
yeah,
pressed. So from the vehicle stopping at 7:20:23 to 7:20:42 when Peyton's emergency button is turned on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Still remaining in phase 3, I'd like to carry on playing the footage, and I'd like it to go to 7:20:56. And then I'll ask you some questions.
6-foot tall, wearing a white t-shirt, dark coloured jeans and carrying a very large knife.
Media 4, control, keep off us. Some
Oh, sorry, can't play that whole message.
activated the emergency button.
Thank you. So, from the button being activated at 7:20 and 42 seconds, we then see a Stephen K acknowledging that somebody's activated the emergency button, and that's at 7:20:56. Who's Stephen K?
I don't know.
I don't know. Is he one of the local he's not in the control room?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
You don't know him?
No.
Right. So someone on Kirkcaldy 1 has acknowledged that the emergency button's been activated. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's something that you can hear and other officers can hear
Yeah.
during that call. Can you explain why, if the emergency button is pressed at 42 seconds past 20 minutes, why it takes 16 seconds or a while for Stephen K to acknowledge that it's been pressed?
I mean, everybody would hear it when it was pressed initially.
So there wouldn't be any delay in hearing that
No.
at the time?
No, everybody, I heard it that morning, everybody hears it who's on Kirkcaldy 1, and then it has an open mic to allow the officer to speak without having to press his radio, so the mic is open. So everybody would have heard it at the time that it was activated. Maybe that individual was just acknowledging they'd heard that he's...
Is there any sort of process whereby emergency buttons, when they're pressed, are acknowledged, or is it because everyone can hear it, it's just known to everybody on the team chat?
Yeah, everybody would hear it, but, you know...
So there's no necessity for that to be acknowledged at any time?
No, but the control room were all aware of the fact that it had been pressed, and so would local officers. Yeah, you would hear it.
Okay. I'm going to ask Miss Wildgoose now to play another section of the audio from 7:20:42. If we could maybe go back slightly and just repeat what we've done. 7:20:42 to 7:21:21. So again, this is just under a minute, starting at 7:20:42. You'll see you can follow that on the spreadsheet if you wish. From 7:20:42. Thank you.
6-foot tall, wearing a white t-shirt, dark coloured jeans and carrying a very large knife.
Media 4, control, keep off us. Somebody activated the emergency button. Officer's injured! PC shot! Braille!
Control acknowledge, officer injured.
What's the locate? We've just got blue lights stopped. Jason Tagala could refer to.
Thank you. So we heard there the transmission, officer injured, PC short, male. And is that something that the control room are monitoring?
Yes.
And we see that it was acknowledged by Con 1, Scott Masterton, at 7:21:09. Is that right? The call is made at 7:21:02. Officers injured, PC short male. That's on page 4 of the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And then it's acknowledged, yes, I was correct, 7:21:09. Con 1, Scott Masterton says control acknowledged, officer injured.
Yeah, and I see that Stephen Kay is obviously the sergeant that was based at Dunfermline, so he's obviously heard that, I would imagine.
So Stephen Kay is actually a local officer based in Dunfermline.
Yeah, I'm just reading from the spreadsheet. That's maybe an officer based at Dunfermline who's maybe heard that as well.
And you're referring to the entry at 7:20:56?
Yeah, yes.
And then if we can also look at 7:21:19, we see on the spreadsheet PC Ashley Tomlinson's emergency status is turned on.
Yes.
When in the ACR you hear the words officer injured,
Mm-hmm.
what happens? Nothing?
No,
Does anything, does that trigger any action on your part?
I mean, yes. I mean, you need to make sure that there's sufficient resources there, that there's a supervisor there or going, any kind of sort of medical, is there a requirement for any kind of medical assistance, an ambulance, or you want an update essentially as to the extent of the officer or anybody else that's been injured at the time, just to get that understanding.
And if you can organise that from the control room?
Yes, control room.
If an ambulance is
yes,
required?
Yes.
Up until this point, has anyone fed back to you?
No.
I'd like to carry on playing till the end of phase 3, please, which will take us to 7:21 and 38 seconds. And again, you can listen to this. So at the moment we're 7:21 and 20, and Miss Wildgoose will continue playing to 7:21 and 38.
Control Bravo, one officer's been punched to the back of the head, no obvious serious injuries, male secure on the ground.
And if you could stop there, please. So you'll see that the final call from phase 3, as I'm calling it, 7:21:38, ends with a transmission from PC Smith saying officers being punched to the back of the head, no obvious serious injuries, male secure on the ground.
Yes.
So, phase 3, beginning on page 3 of the spreadsheet, 7:20:13, with your call, your transmission, the stay safe message. You see that?
Yes, yeah.
7:20:13 until the top of page 5 of the spreadsheet, 7:21:38, with PC Smith saying male secure on the ground.
Yes.
Right. And within that phase, we see that the first police van stops on Hayfield Road. We saw that on the bus stop, 7:20:23. See that on the spreadsheet? That's again on page 3.
Yes.
So the first police van stops at 23 seconds past 7:20, and the man is secure on the ground at 7:21:38.
Yes.
And these timings are accurate within 1 second.
Yes.
during that period, from the first van stopping to the man secure on the ground is to within a second accuracy, 75 seconds. There's evidence produced to the chair that during that time that Mr. Bayou there's been 3 discharges of spray, CS or PAVA. An officer has attempted to baton him. Another officer has battened him to the head and the body. And another officer has shoulder charged him to the ground within that period. Do you have any comments about how that timescale ties in with what you've said to us today about initial assessments or dynamic risk assessments?
I mean, just that obviously the control room weren't aware that activity had taken place on the ground from when they first arrived, because that information wasn't fed back. But there's obviously been that arrival at the scene, and it appears from what you've shown me today, the officers have come into contact with the male almost immediately.
How much time would you think is required to do an initial assessment or a dynamic risk assessment?
Certainly, if it was me, I would be wanting to pull my van or my car up a distance away so I could see the individual, see what they were doing, see what they were behaving like, whether or not I could see a weapon or not, and then maybe make an approach after that. So I had that space and distance between, just to get an understanding and relay that message back. But that's just me when I look at the reconstruction.
How long would you anticipate that observation period lasting?
It could be quite quick. I mean, it was a fast-moving incident, so it would be quite quick. But it would be a case of having a look, but and seeing what was going on and deciding what you thought that threat you were facing was, and then shouting back up over the radio. So it could be 10 seconds. It could be more. It could be longer.
Could you give me 1 second, please? Sorry, I just wanted to check something there. I would like to ask you about a later airwave transmission by Officer Maxwell. And could we play it from, perhaps from the top of page 5 actually, which is the end of phase 3, 7:21:38. This is from the message of Alan Smith, male secure on the ground. And I'd like to play this phase, which is phase 4, to the end, which is to 7:25:17. So it's a slightly longer area of footage. And Miss Wildgoose will do that, and you can follow it on the spreadsheet if you wish, or you can look at the screen. Thank you very much, Miss Wildgoose.
Control Bravo, one officer's been punched in the back of the head, no obvious serious injuries. Male secure on the ground. 30 seconds out, 4-1.
It's Maxwell. If you're alive, go ahead and give me an update, please.
Papa Whiskey 101. I'll just approach. I'll give you an update. Update, Bill! I'm just struggling. Control. Control from 411.
Well, one back message here and therefore I'm sure control working.
Roger, the mail's on the ground at the moment. We've got several officers that have taken a big restraint. We'll get back to you. However, we're going to need more control with light restraints, etc. But down on the ground, so there's no risk at the moment.
Yes, yes, can I get an update on an injury?
For 401, PC shots been shot to the head. It's a bit upset. I'm going to need a ambulance here to check her over. No bleeding, no visible injury.
Yes, yes, just continually to stay safe and keep full control. Use all restraints necessary. Control, can you get an ambulance please for a PC shot?
Roger. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm on route from Edinburgh. I think this is the same mail tonight, yeah?
Yes, yes.
No, 411.
Go ahead.
Although there's no visible injuries to PC shots, he's been stumped the body a few times, etc. And struck to the head. We'll see the ambulance can attend the SAT.
Yeah, we're getting an ambulance now. You know, so the locus, can you just confirm what the actual locus is?
Hayfield Road, junction with Henry Road.
Control 41 Bravo.
Go ahead.
Roger, this now now still appears to be unconscious, breathing, not responsive. The ambulance for him.
Thank you. So to put this into context, this next question, Inspector, this phase that we've just listened to, phase 4, starts with the man being secure on the ground and ends with the man being unconscious. And I'd like to now ask you about a particular airwave transmission that we'll just simply look at on the spreadsheet, if you don't mind. It's on page 8, so it's the page after the one that we've just finished looking at. And it's about a third of the way down. And it's an airwaves transmission by Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell. And it says, you'll see it at 7:26:52. So this is after the period when the man is unconscious. 7:26:52 on page 8. And it's Sergeant Maxwell saying, just for the log, the initial on attendance is males attacked, PC short. Can you see that?
Yes.
I'm going to ask Miss Wildgoose to play that part of the recording. So this is at 7:26:52.
Says to Seafield Road.
Just for the log, initial in attendance, this male was attacked, PC shot quite violently. As a result, he was sprayed with CS and plasma and battens. There may be a suggestion that he had these battens to the head area. 4-1 over.
Thank you. Were you able to follow that?
Yes.
So that's information that's being fed back to you from Sergeant Maxwell?
Fed back to the control room.
Sorry, yes,
Yeah,
fed
yeah.
back to the control room,
Yeah.
yes. And it starts with the words, just for the log.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can take it from me for the moment, there's no other airwaves transmissions on this spreadsheet that start with the words, just for the log. And I'm trying to understand what that actually means when an officer says, just for the log.
Okay, so it's almost like police jargon. So the log will mean the command and control log, the incident. So my take on that is that APS Maxwell is saying, just for the log, can you put on the incident that this is what's happened on initial attendance? The officer has been assaulted or attacked. So that's him saying, retrospectively, he's maybe spoken to the officers there, I don't know, but just for the log is, can you record it on the incident, is my interpretation of that.
So it's a retrospective transmission, perhaps through information that he's received from other officers.
Yeah, who were there initially and saw or were there at the time and have subsequently told him.
And he's then feeding that back to the control room, so there's a record of it?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I'm conscious of the time, but I would like to just very briefly move back into the dynamic risk assessment paragraphs in your statement,
Okay.
paragraphs 25 and 26. And this is a statement we referred to earlier. So you're talking about the dynamic risk assessment and the NDM, National Decision Model, and you've given quite a lot of information to the chair in those paragraphs. Part of the passage refers to giving people space and time to speak to them. That's the words taken. Don't know if we can get that onto the screen. Let's see. Yes, so it's right in the middle of the screen now. It's just the paragraph immediately above number 26. And you say the reality is, because it's quick time, that they'll have been going to the incident, they'll have been searching, they'll have seen, and I would suspect if the male has a knife or not a knife, then they decide what they're going to do. Do you see that paragraph?
Yes.
Yes. And it says, and then they take it from there in terms of feeding back. So it will be done really, really quickly. They'll decide whether or not they can deal with the individual. We're all trained in communication, tactical communication. It's part of our OST. Tell people to stop, stand back, sit down, put the knife down, do whatever. So you get all that. Give people space and time to speak to them. Every police officer is a negotiator, effectively, but not to the extent that the specialists are, but you're using your communication skills all the time. Do you see that that's what you've said there?
Yes.
And I'd just like to ask you about that. When you're talking about giving people space and time to speak to them, what do you mean by that?
If you're approaching an individual who was maybe distressed, upset, or had issues, just standing back and speaking to them, to give them that little bit of space to understand what is happening for them. Sometimes that can work effectively in terms of de-escalating, but on other occasions it doesn't, depending on the mindset of the individual, or if they're under any, if they have mental health issues or any behavioural issues, or under the influence of alcohol or drugs. But it is that standing back, giving them a bit of space and time to see if you can speak to them to calm things down.
And when you're using the word speak to them,
Mm-hmm.
what sort of tone of voice are you envisaging? You've talked about calming things down.
Yeah. So it would, if I mean, again, I'm just thinking about myself. It would be a case of asking them if they're okay, what was wrong, where they were going, you know, what's been happening to you. Are you okay? Do you have anything in your hands? Have you got a knife? Where is it? You know, tell me what's been happening to you, and we'll try and get this resolved. And we need to speak to you to understand what's going on. But tell me what's been happening for you today. That's a personal way I would approach it.
And when you use the word space, what are you thinking of? What do you mean by that, space?
Physical space, so you're not right on top of them, giving them that distance. So you've got your own reactionary gap as well to protect yourself, but you've got that space, so you're not right on top of them, closing them down in a manner that could instigate conflict or concern for them, just to give them that space.
You've used the expression reactionary gap.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
So just in terms of, again, officer safety training, you're taught to have a reactionary gap if you're approaching someone or dealing with someone who's maybe potentially violent, so you can stand back and maybe use your PPE, maybe use your hands just to stay back. But there is that gap, so people can't close you down as quickly as if you were right in front of them, for your own safety.
And PPE is your equipment?
Yeah, it's your vest, your handcuffs, your baton, your PAVA spray, leg restraints.
And you also talked about time. What do you mean when you used the word time in your statement?
I suppose space and time. So it's about giving them that space to stay back, and the time. If it takes a bit of time to understand what's going on, then so be it. But it's given that opportunity to potentially de-escalate the situation, as opposed to sort of rushing in.
And in this paragraph, you also mention OST. Is that officer safety training?
Yes.
Are these skills that all officers in Police Scotland are taught?
Yes. Yep.
As part of the training package that's provided by the organisation? And can these skills be adopted even if the person is holding a knife?
Yes, I would certainly say the space and the time. Staying back, and maybe it might be an opportunity to almost like try and use your communication skills, your negotiating skills, to ask the individual to put the knife down or whatever. But it depends on the circumstances. It's variable. Sometimes it can have a positive outcome, and other times, it doesn't matter what's said. The individual might have a particular mindset, and or there might needs to be that sort of intervention earlier on, just depending on the circumstance. So I don't know the circumstance that happened.
No, but it's an option that officers are taught,
yes,
that they can attempt if the circumstances are right.
Yeah, I mean, if someone's got a knife, you're trained officer safety training. If someone has a knife, the main thing is to create that distance between yourself and them. You utilise cover and transmit what you're seeing in front of you to other officers, so that they're aware, if they're attending, that someone has a knife.
Thank you. I'm very conscious of the time. I'm not going to finish this witness in the next 15 minutes or even half an hour. I've got quite a large number of questions still to ask.
I think what we'll do is we'll take a break at this point, and we can assess how best to go forward with this evidence.
Thank you.
Good. Inspector, we normally rise about now, but I think I'll sit on for another hour or so to see if we can get through your evidence. Yes,
Because I can, Inspector.
so, just a moment, I think there's Mitchell has a matter to raise. So you want me to adjourn for that purpose?
Well, if we could just have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Right, well, I'll allow that. Yeah. No, Miss Graham.
Thank you. Could I ask you to look again at your inquiry statement, please? Paragraphs 34 and 35. These ones. Oh, right. That's good. Sorry. Paragraph 34 talks about the criteria for deployment of armed response officers being considered by you for a fast-moving incident, and you talk about having professional eyes on the ground at the location. Is that the police officers that you're referring to?
Yes.
And they are to provide a live time update, which would then inform my decision-making further and the next course of action. Is that information feeding into the control room, which allows you to adopt the national decision-making model?
Yes.
For me, given the immediacy of the incident, the local officers with their training were the initial persons to attend the incident. For me, would have with a stay safe warning to tell me what was going on, to feed back information, and then if the male was behaving in a way that was threatening or aggressive or brandishing a weapon, or whatever it would be, a case of instructing them to stay back and then tell me what they could see, give me an update, and then I would take it from there. So this is where you're talking about, even if someone is behaving in a threatening and aggressive manner or brandishing a weapon, that it would be open to you to say, stay back, tell me what you can see, give me an update, and you would take it from there.
Yes.
And what do you mean you would take it from there?
If I felt the threat was significant enough towards the officers or members of the public, and that kind of conduct was happening, aggressive behaviour with a knife or threatening behaviour, then I would take command of the incident. I'd give them instruction to pull back a distance, to keep observations on, to keep themselves out of immediate risk in terms of space and distance, and it would, for me, it would be depending on the circumstances, it would be a declared firearms incident, and resources, ARVs and dog unit would have to come from Edinburgh or Stirling, but Edinburgh was my choice for this incident.
So even if someone's threatening or behaving aggressively with a weapon, it is an option for the officers on the scene to create space and distance between that person and themselves.
Yes.
And you can take control of that incident if they feed back that information to you.
I could if it was a declared firearms incident, if I was declaring that. Normally it would sit with local officers, local supervisors on the ground, but if I felt that it needed me to take charge of it from a firearms perspective, I would probably be listening to what they were saying anyway, and making sure that they were keeping that distance from the individual anyway.
And you mentioned a dog unit a moment ago. What involvement would you have in organising a dog unit?
It would be the overview would get in contact with a dog unit and ask them to attend the incident.
And when you say the overview, would that be yourself, or would it be Michelle or Scott?
It would be the comms officer that would more than likely do that.
So probably Michelle. Sorry, I forget her second name.
Hutchison. Yes, it was her, I think, that contacted.
Thank you.
The dog unit.
So on the 3rd of May 2015, it was the communications officer that instructed the dog unit to attend.
That's my recollection. Yes.
Thank you. And then paragraph 35, please. And this spans 2 pages. It says it's one of those situations where if they had stopped and said, he's brandishing a knife, we're not going to get out our vehicles, he's walking towards the vehicles, it isn't safe for us to deal with, then I would have taken charge of it, command of it, and I would have instructed the local officers what I wanted them to do until specialist officers, possibly including the ARVs, arrived. And could you go up the page slightly, Miss Wildgoose, so I can read that? it would have been a declared firearms incident with ARVs going, me briefing them on the way, me telling the uniformed officers at the locus to stay back but keep a visual observation on the individual and give me any updates whatsoever. So in terms of that strategy, you would have been coordinating with the ARVs, asking the officers at the scene for feedback, considering any specialist officers you wanted to attend. And you said you could have declared a firearms incident with ARVs. What does that actually mean?
So it's just that it's the formal sort of declaration of an incident, so everybody knows that it's a firearms response where I would have control of it, command of it, so that I would then take control of the incident from local policing, and I would issue instructions and guidance and advice to officers to keep safe and to get these sort of lifetime updates back, so I could understand what was going on the ground. And then armed officers would be authorised to deploy from Edinburgh. They would listen out on Kirkcaldy 1 as well, and then I would brief them as they were going on a separate firearms channel with the tactics that I wanted them to employ when they got to that location.
All right, thank you. And in 2015, did armed officers have access to tasers?
Yes, that was one of their less lethal options, but local policing officers didn't at that time.
And would it have been possible for you on the 3rd of May 2015 to deploy an armed response vehicle to attend at Hayfield Road?
Yes.
And according to what you've said in paragraph 35, when this is going on in the control room, you're expecting individual officers at the scene to be carrying out visual observations.
Yes, I mean, I would be looking for officers at the scene to be looking to tell me what was actually happening at the location. If that makes sense.
And then the paragraph goes on to say, again, even within that, I think this is a reference to the ARVs, they could have been on their way and got as far as Dunfermline, and the guy could have put the knife down. It just depends how the actual incident unfolds, but it wasn't like that. It was a case of they arrived, they were requested to feedback whether or not they could deal with the individual, and they subsequently went on to deploy and arrest him. What then happened after that, I have no direct knowledge of.
Yes.
Thank you. Can you give us an indication if officers had fed back from the scene about what they were seeing and observing, and how long that would take you then? If you take a decision you're going to take control, how long does it take you to make that decision between an officer saying, this is what I can see, and you taking a decision to take control?
If I was given information from officers at the scene that they were facing a threat, or someone was approaching them with any kind of weapon, I would instruct them to take back, and I would tell them, make it known there and then that I was taking charge. I was declaring it as a firearms incident. I would take command, and this is what I wanted them to do in the interim to stay safe.
Two things I'd like to ask you. When you say take back, is that the creating space, move away from the person?
Yes.
And when you say you declare it a firearms incident, there may be people saying, but there wasn't a gun involved, and being a little confused. Is it okay for you to declare a firearms incident even if someone says there's not a firearm in the sense of a gun?
Yeah, I mean, the definition, the College of Policing definition about the criteria for the deployment of firearms officers to an incident, it talks about reason to suppose that persons are in possession of or of immediate access to a firearm or other lethal weapon. So it could be a knife, it could be an axe, it could be a bow and arrow.
So a knife is a
machete,
potentially lethal weapon and
Yes.
could trigger the ARV.
Yes.
I'll come back to that in a moment. Can I ask you about something different? There's evidence before the chair about a nearby psychiatric hospital
Yes.
in the area, and that dealt with patients with mental health problems. How would information about the existence of a psychiatric hospital in the area be communicated to you in Bilston Glen?
It would either be through the officers on the ground who had that local knowledge, or officers within the control room that were aware of the hospital at that location. That's how it would be communicated to me.
Is that sort of information available to you on your overview screen?
If it was on the incident, yes, I would like to think it would be made available to me, but it would probably come down to local knowledge or looking up Google Maps, or it would be local knowledge of the people in the control room that there was a hospital there.
Or information shared by the officers at the scene who knew the area
Yeah,
via the airwaves?
They would be the ones that were best placed to give me that information.
If someone had absconded from the hospital, either the psychiatric hospital or the nearby Victoria Infirmary, how could that information be shared with you?
And had it been reported to the police and an incident was created, we would look at the incidents that were in and around that time to see if there was any links. And that was one of the things that we did in the control room at the time, the overview at the time, was to look at the different calls that had come in, the incidents that had come in relation to the report, and to try and marry them up and tie them up to see whether or not they were related and linked together, to give us an understanding of just what was going on. So if there was someone reported to be missing from a local psychiatric hospital, you would like to think you would pick that up and think, could it be this individual that's missing from the hospital?
So part of your job is to see connections between reports or other information that you have in the control room?
Yeah, and the officer that was in there, called the raid officer, they were looking at these kind of jobs. We were all probably looking to see if there was anything that we could link together.
If you had that information available to you, is that the sort of information you'd share over the airwaves with officers about to attend the scene?
Yes, I mean, we would phone the hospital to ask who was missing, what their description was, when had they left, where was they last seen, and you know, what was the risk or their understanding of risk to members of the public, and then that information would be important to be passed out to local attending officers to help them in their risk assessment when they come across the individual as well.
And who is it that would phone the hospital to ask those questions?
The controller, control one would have been busy, so it might have been a supervisor, or it might have been someone in the overview that would have taken that responsibility to do that, just to check.
And is it possible for officers travelling to a scene to contact control and say, could you check? There's a local psychiatric hospital, can you check what the up-to-date position is?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. And if it's not anyone who's absconded from a hospital, but say it's a missing person, if there's been a report about a missing person, is that also information that you'll be checking and communicating to officers?
Yes.
Thank you. I would like now to play an audio tape, PS 02107, and you may see, Inspector, in the black folder, a transcript. This is a call, and the time of it is 0912, so 0912, 35 seconds, on the 3rd of May 2015. Oh, sorry. Thank you. We just wait a second. Well, while we're waiting on that, what I might do is just finish up some other questions. When we looked at the spreadsheet earlier, I asked you about the airways transmission at 7:17 and 23, which is the message from Scott Maxwell, asking about a dog unit being available or an ARV. So that's 7:17:23. And at 7:19:12, 7:17:23, and that's on page 2, 7:19:12.
Yes.
He asked for an update on the availability, and I think I went through with you, Con 1, I believe a dog unit is en route.
Yeah.
Had you instructed the deployment of the dog unit?
Yeah, so between these times, I got back into the overview. I wasn't aware of the 7:17:23 request. I personally never heard that, but based on the incident, the way it was unfolding, the information that was coming in, I asked Michelle Hutchison to make contact with a dog unit and also to make the ARVs aware of an incident that was happening in Kirkcaldy.
And where was the nearest dog unit?
I think it was in Edinburgh. I know there was only one on for the area, and I think it was in Edinburgh.
And is there normally more?
It could depend, but one dog unit for an area on a Sunday morning is proportionate, or is, you know, it happens. But sometimes there could be more on, depending on the time of week and incidents that were
Thank you.
happening.
I'm not asking that question. Do you have any impression of how long it would normally take a dog unit on a Sunday morning to travel from Edinburgh to Kirkcaldy?
Yeah, I mean, it's 27 miles, so it would take 25 minutes at least. I would suggest is what I would think. Maybe faster, maybe faster, but 20 minutes.
It could be faster perhaps on a Sunday morning when the roads are quiet?
Yeah, yep.
Well, we may hear further evidence about that. Can I ask you also to look at the other element at 7:19? The Michelle Hutchinson, Con 2, Control 2, said she was organising an ARV as well, standby. That was just shortly after the transmission on the dog unit. What is meant by organising?
So it's the language that she's used there. I have asked her to contact the ARVs at Fetis to make them aware of the sort of developing incident that was happening in Kirkcaldy. So she's done that, and she's responded on the radio to say that she's organising an ARV as well, but which is different from an ARV is authorised to attend in a firearms capacity. It's just confirming that she's made contact, so they're aware. Specialist Resources, Dog Unit and ARVs are aware of what's going on and listening out.
So there's contact, they're on standby,
Yes, yeah.
But they've not actually at that moment been deployed to attend and leave Edinburgh and travel to Kirkcaldy.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a collapse in time frame. It was happening very, very quickly. So it was a case of making them aware, so they could get ready to get to their vehicles, to potentially be deployed to the incident as it was unfolding.
Thank you. Can we now please play the audio tape? So it's PS 02107, and you will have a transcript in front of you, which you can follow as you listen to the audio tape. And then once we've listened to it all, and the chair and the assessor will have a copy, once we've listened to it all, I'll ask you some questions. So this is a call recorded at 9:12 and 35 seconds on the 3rd of May 2015. Miss Wildgoose.
Hello, Steve Stewart speaking. Hi, Keith. How are we doing? Stevie K here.
Hi, how you doing? Are you wanting that incident restricted?
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
Yeah, we talked about it earlier on today, but we're obviously not getting an update on what's happened to the mail, but
The last update I had was they were 38 minutes working on them, and they'll go to 45.
right, okay, doke. That's not so good then. Right, we'll get it view rated. We'll need to get names of who all needs access to it then, in that case. I don't know if you want to tell me who needs...
Give Chief Super Gary McEwen access to it.
Wait a second. Chief Soup, Gary McEwen.
Chief Inspector Nicky Shepherd.
CI Nicky Shepherd.
Chief Inspector Chris Stones.
CI Chris Stones.
Myself, Stephen K. PH.
PI Stephen K.
And DI Robson.
DI. What do you know his first name or? No.
Colin Robson.
Colin Robson.
And PI Jane Coombe.
I know. Jane Coombe.
If I need any for some other illustrious gaffer like you,
Right.
you know what I'd like.
Aye. How's the cop? Is the cop all right?
The full shift off the street.
The full shift off the street.
Right there.
Aye.
So, we'll get basic trim and the Federation getting that coming.
Want to speak to the fire inspector? All right. I've got Kay Finlay from media. She's on call at Fetis. In fact, I'll get a number and I'll get her to phone you or something like that.
Phone me on.
Oh, she's apparently knows the number. She can phone you on.
Perfect.
Right. Okay. But so they're all off. I mean, the job's very sketchy in terms of what happened. But I see the previous job that the woman's obviously phoned in saying that there's been some kind of disturbance or domestic. But I mean, I don't know the geography there, but the guys must have been. There's a station nearby. They were on that. They were on that so quickly. It was too quick actually. I don't know even if he's heard.
No.
Was he?
What happened? It came over and I just brought up the stay safe thing. You got on. And I was on the phone and another salesman gave my number. And they were en route and they got told to be safe. And we had like ARV and the dog and that. And all of a sudden,
the emergency button goes.
I think we stopped. He's basically he's the size of a house.
Is he?
He's just run at them.
Oh dear. Aye.
We had a couple of cops who are probably sitting 18, 19%, and generally speaking, if they weren't there, I'm trying to think what would have happened.
Yeah, and did he have knives on him type thing?
He ran at them with a knife.
Oh, has he? See, that's, you know, oh dear me. I mean, for me, that's an ARV job, but it's just, you know, but and a dog job, but it's obviously the time they've obviously come across it.
Dynamics-wise, there was no time. He'd
No.
put mind up for them.
Yeah, aye. And the thing is, as well, when you've got someone going down the street with a knife, you still have, my view is, cops still have to go, even if they park at the end, stop at the car at the end of the street to say, I can see him, this is what's happening with him. But see, when you look at the timestamps, I suspect it's even happened quicker than the timestamps, but it's over in 3 minutes or something like that almost, for the first call.
You could even get in there to make an initial assessment to do the basics of guard water patrol.
Yeah.
That's
That's it, it's done and dusted. The first,
basically just went for them,
yeah. Well, that's so dear.
I haven't seen them, but
Yeah.
they're decent size.
Is he? Well, hopefully they're all right and he's all right type thing. But right, okay, we'll get that view rated just now. And Kate Finlay, she's at media at Fetis, her extension is. She said she's going to phone you.
I get Katie phone me, that was fine.
Right, okay, I'll get that. Okay, cheers, mate. Bye bye.
Were you able to follow that
Yes.
as we played it? So who's speaking? Is that you, Inspector
Yeah,
Stewart?
it's myself and Stephen Kay, who was the inspector at the time.
So Stephen the Kay, the one that we mentioned
Yeah.
when we saw his name on the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So he's a local officer from Dunfermline. And this is a conversation that you had with him at 9:12 on the 3rd of May.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask you, first of all, let's look at this expression on page 2 of the transcript. He's the size of a house. What's your impression of someone who's the size of a house?
Just someone who's hugely built, massively built.
Can you give us any more, could you give us a range of what you mean when you say massively built?
That description for me is just someone who's really well built, powerful, tall, broad, muscly, big build is what I think Stephen's
How
describing.
tall? Can you give me an idea of a
Well,
range?
if it was 6 foot plus is what I think of when I think about someone that size.
Not someone 5'10",
No,
12 stone 10.
no.
And you talk about the guys, presumably the police officers, being on the scene so quickly, too quick actually. What did you mean when you said that?
Just that they were there very, very quickly at the locus, too quick for specialist resources or armed resources to be deployed from Edinburgh. So they've had to deal with the incident, which was right because it was important that officers were there, but it didn't really give any opportunity for specialist resources to assist them with the incident. But they were off really, really quickly in terms of their actions and just going into the incident.
So you weren't in a position to support them from the control room?
Not with specialist officers that were going, but because it happened so quickly, even with that sort of advice or any kind of guidance that could be offered other than just the very, very quick jump on the talk group to remind them of the need to make that initial risk assessment and feed information back.
You're talking about the call that we've referred to earlier, listened to earlier, that you'd made about doing initial assessment and feedback.
Yes.
And you've said you never received any feedback.
No, I didn't.
To that. There's a point in the transcript where you talk about officers sitting at 80 or 90%. I could hear that, but I don't see it in the transcript. What did you mean by that?
Sorry,
You didn't hear that?
I didn't hear that.
We'll leave that. And then you were told by Stephen Kay that the man had ran at them with a knife. I understand that at this stage you didn't have any information about the circumstances.
No, I mean, it wasn't even confirmed for me that the male had a knife.
Thank you. And then just slightly further down, you talk about, for you, that's an ARV job, a dog job, but it's obviously the time. They've obviously come across him. Again, you're mentioning the time. What were you meaning when you said that?
It was one of these instances where the time was the critical factor in it, and as much as that the officers were deployed to the incident immediately because it was nearby. They were there so quickly, and they've obviously decided to deal with him or deal with the threat that they were faced at the time before any kind of specialists or any other officers could be there to support them. So the time was a critical factor in this incident.
And then you go on to say, and the thing is as well, when you've got someone going down the street with a knife, you still have, my view is, cops still have to go, even if they park around, stop the car at the end of the street to say, I can see him, this is what's happening to him. But see, when you look at the times, the timestamps, I suspect it's even happened quicker than the timestamps, but it's over in 3 minutes or something like that, almost for the first call. And can you explain what a timestamp is, first of all?
So it's just almost like the times on the side of the side of that sheet. It's all just on the actual storm log. It's just times that are recorded when information comes in.
So this is really what you were talking about earlier this afternoon about stopping the car, the police vehicle. You've said they're at the end of the street or a distance away, and then observing from that position.
Yes.
And that's something that the officers on the scene could have created, that space and that distance and that time.
They could have.
Thank you. I'd like to play another call, please, which is PS 02134. And this is a call at 9:25 on the same day, so 15, not quite 15 minutes later. And again, you should have a transcript before you for that, showing that. And I think we'll play that if we can, quite loudly if possible.
Good morning, Area Control Room Sergeant.
Hi, Stevie. It's me, Stewart upstairs. How you doing, mate? Had a quick update from PI Stephen,
All right.
the PIO. They're still working on the mail at the hospital in Resus, but it's not looking good for him.
Okay.
I think I spoke to him about 5 minutes ago, and he was saying that they resuscitated him for 45 minutes, and they were on about minute 38 or something like that.
Oh, right, okay.
So it's not probably not looking good for him. The media officer is in at Fettis, so she's linking in with him. There's been some. We'll probably get the calls up here, or they're going straight to her, but there's been some report, some Daily Record reporters suggesting that a female officer's been stabbed in Fife, but...
Ricky Christie down here also took one to Radio Clyde asking if it was to confirm that a police officer had been stabbed.
Yeah, well, what would there's going to be a full statement sent out, but the media are fetid. Now, I don't know if I think the media phone in a separate number, an outside number, and she answers it, so I wouldn't give them that number direct, but if you just tell them that there's someone
preparing a statement.
That's fine, that's within the press office at Fettis. But I spoke to the, and we're viewed the incident as well, to yourself, to Peter, and to sort of senior officers, so we've been six of them, and we've also viewed the other one at
his
address.
Yep.
Just listen to the radio just now. Right, that's okay. It's just taking a look now. I spoke to Stephen Kay, and I was saying that what was his sort of recollection of the incident, or how did he see it? And he says it was over before it started, type thing. They've basically gone out straight on they've sort of heard I put a message, he's put out a safety message, but by that stage, or just the next thing is the emergency button activates. But I think what's happened is they've come across him straight away, got out of the car and he's run at them, and he's a big guy, massive by all accounts, and I think he's probably been under the influence of a drink or something like that, and he has been in possession of knives, so they've had to just react instantaneously, so there was no time for anything. But
all things given, then they're probably fortunate that they came out as well as they did.
Absolutely. So we'll wait and see what happens, but that was the latest update from...
No, that's fine. I'll just update Scott, because he's sort of managing at the moment, but we'll sort of go over and speak to him.
Aye, cool.
So it's not looking good for him.
Not looking good for him just now, and it's been curated, and it's just a case of just keeping quite tight lipped about it, but he's doing a good job as well, so it's feeling busy.
No, that's fine. I'll pass on.
And if there is any more information, I'll get in touch with you.
No worries, that's perfect. Thanks for that.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Right, do you recognise the voices on this one?
Yes, it's myself and Stephen Bissett, who was a sergeant on the Fife control area at the time.
And there's two things I'd like to ask you about, and this first thing is on the second page of your transcript. So it's you speaking, and you say it was over before it started type thing. They've basically gone out straight onto him. They've sort of heard that I put out a message. He'd put out a safety message, but by that stage, just the next thing, the emergency button is activated. I think what's happened is they've come across him straight away, got out the car, and he's run at them. And he's a big guy, massive by all accounts. And I think he's probably been under the influence of the drink or something like that. And he has been in possession of knives, so they've just had to react instantaneously, so there's no time for anything. But is that information that you're sharing with Bissett that you've received from Kay?
Yes, I think it's from Kay and from probably other information that's that's come through the internal control room side of things.
So information that's circulating
Yeah.
about the incident that's come to your ears through in the control room.
Yeah, yeah.
And then on the last page, you say at one point, it's just a case of keeping quite tight-lipped about it. What did you mean by that?
Probably just because it's a significant incident, just to make sure that staff on the ground, everybody's got social media, phones, accounts, some things, when they're significant, it's really important that it stays within the control room or within the police and not shared out informally through people texting out or doing anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's just what having read that, that's what I think I meant.
Yeah. Can we go back to your statement, please? Paragraph 51. And here you're explaining to the Chair, I'm considering the threat, the risk, what resources are appropriate to deploy in the circumstances of the incident. I'm not controlling what happens on the ground locally unless it becomes a firearms incident, in which case I take charge of the incident in its entirety. That's in line with what you've already told us this afternoon. But what you have is you've got your resources, your training and your timescales. They're the three critical things that feature centrally in this particular incident for me. What resources are available, immediately available, and can attend to either mitigate the threat that's out there with the male with the knife? What training do they have in terms of dealing with an individual? And we have that through our OST, and you've explained that's officer safety training. What protective equipment they have, what communication skills they have, and the fact they're given a stay safe warning from the control room and a warning by their own sergeant at the time, who is also attending the incident. And then what are the realistic timescales for this? And the reality with this particular incident was that there's none in terms of the time. The time is a significant, I'm going to the next page, feature in the whole thing, because there's no time essentially. Local officers are en route, about to go off at the scene, and we are waiting for some kind of update or feedback on what they're seeing in front of them in terms of threat, risk and harm, which will then inform the next course of action. Was it your understanding when you prepared this statement that as you said in this audio message, that the man had gone at them with a knife and they had to react instantaneously?
No, that's
That's separate.
Yeah, I mean, I had no knowledge that I didn't. There was nothing to say that the man had gone at them with a knife. I wasn't aware that the man had gone at them with a knife.
All right, thank you. Can we move on to paragraph 54, please? You've given the Chair a description of certain factors that are risk factors or factors that can be taken into account when you're assessing risk and threat. Is it a relevant factor that officers attend incidents in pairs rather than individually?
Yes, I mean the majority of time now officers are paired up. It's for officer safety, and it tends to be the method of patrol, certainly on a response vehicle where they're attending dynamic and serious incidents.
Thank you. Paragraph 55, which is on page 29, page 29. In this section of your paragraph, of your statement, I should say, you've talked about escape routes and cover and considering risk. We've already gone through that today. There's no mention in here of police officers running someone over with a police van. In your experience, is that an acceptable option for officers under any circumstances?
Sorry, could you just ask me that again, please?
Yes, of course. Sure. So you in this paragraph, you're talking about different options for officers and factors that are important in relation to assessing threats and that such like. There's no mention in this part of your statement about police officers running someone over with a police van. And I wondered if that is an acceptable option for officers when they attend a scene, to run into somebody with a police van.
It wouldn't be certainly something that would be expected to be done. I mean, but I don't know what depends on what. I suppose it depends on the incident that you have. But
if calls have come in that someone has a knife,
yeah,
and officers attend,
mm-hmm.
is it acceptable that they simply just run that person down?
No.
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 Thank you. Can I ask you about paragraph 56, please? This is headed up terror threat levels. You've explained in this part of your statement you didn't view this as a terrorist incident based on the information you had at the time on the 3rd of May. You knew the man was black, but that hasn't altered your view about the fact you took the view it wasn't a terrorist incident.
I was working on the information and intelligence that was available and fed back, but there was nothing to suggest during that incident that it was a terrorist-related incident at all.
Thank you. And had any of the officers who were going to attend the scene been concerned that they were attending a terrorist incident, what would you have expected them to do in relation to their communications with the control room?
Their concerns should have been voiced or would have been voiced.
And would there be any reason why they couldn't do that before they attend or at the point they attend?
No, it would just be a radio message that they would transmit.
Thank you. Could you look at a standard operating procedure, please? PS 10985. This is called Armed Policing Operations. You'll see the front page. Now this is 118 pages long. I'm not going to take you to all of those pages, but you'll see this is the SOP for Armed Policing Operations. And I'd like to ask you about section 10, which I think is on page 20. And paragraph 10.2, is this the reason to suppose mention you made earlier in your evidence?
Yes.
And does it also say that it can include a potentially lethal weapon? We see that just above halfway on the screen. Potentially
yes.
lethal weapon, which you've told us could be a knife.
Yes.
Thank you. And then can we look at paragraph or section 9, paragraph 9.9. And is this area of responsibility, area control room duty officer, that's your role on the 3rd of May, that was your role.
Yeah.
And so this is the section of the SOP that would deal with the way you conducted your work on that day.
Yes, it would be.
Thank you. Right. Can you tell us, did it make any difference whatsoever to the work that you were doing in the control room that Mr. Bio was black?
No.
Are you aware of certain stereotypes regarding black people? Say, for example, we've heard in the audio that he was the size of a house, and that there may be these stereotypes that black people are bigger or more aggressive or less compliant.
I am aware of stereotypes like that. I mean, there was something in the press today about tasers being used down south, and there's research being done that black people are more likely to be tasered by police officers. That was in the news today. So,
you've obviously done a lot of training, specialist training, and have you done equality and diversity training?
yeah, actually running a equality and diversity team just now in my current role. So I have done equality and diversity and inclusion training.
What training are you giving officers in relation to black stereotypes, or you've mentioned situations down in England? Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, in terms of hate crime, I review hate crime on a daily basis. in terms of it's about officers. I suppose it's about officers being aware and members of the public being aware of prejudices that they might hold, what discrimination is, what hate crime is, what a hate incident is.
Were you part of training in that field in 2015?
No.
I understand that in error, I said that we'd been provided with your CV previously. I understand that, in fact, it's not a CV, it's scope records.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes. And that is information about the training you've had and that type of thing. And if we have now been provided with your scope records, that's something that we can refer to and consider your training and your experience.
Yes.
And how many years' experience do you have as an officer?
About 29 and a half.
Thank you. Could you just give me one moment? I appreciate I've kept you here very late today, Inspector, but there may be other matters to be dealt with, but I'm now finished. Thank you.
Are there any applications in respect of this witness? You want me to adjourn for that purpose? Very well. Sorry, before I adjourn, is there anybody else? No. All right. Well, Ms. Mitchell? To consider it? Yes. Well, I'll rise briefly if you'd like to consider it. now that I think the general order of submissions should be the same as the general order of the opening speeches. So, Ms Mitchell, I think you'd be first.
Yes, my Lord, I just would like to ask if I can ask questions in relation to
I should advise you before you start that real-time transcription stops at 5:15, but the transcription will be then made up tomorrow morning from the recording.
I see.
But I don't think we need real-time transcription necessarily.
I would hope not, no.
Yes.
My Lord, I just wish a clarification in respect of a question which arose. The Senior Counsel to the Inquiry asked the officer, what training are you giving officers in relation to black stereotypes? Or you have mentioned situations down in England, tell us a bit about that. And the officer responded, I mean, in terms of hate crime reviews on a daily basis, in terms of it's about officers, I suppose it's about officers being aware and members of the public being aware of prejudices that they might hold, what discrimination is, what a hate crime is, and what a hate incident is. And what I would like to have the officer answer the question is, what training are you giving to officers in relation to black stereotypes for suspects of offences, not those who have crimes committed against them? So the officer has answered the question in terms of the questions of hate crimes against people, black people, and I want to know what training is being given in relation to black suspects and stereotypes.
Very well, I shall allow you to ask that. Ms McCall.
Yes, thank you, sir. I put in a written Rule 9 application in respect of this witness that contained in total 16 questions. I'm grateful to Senior Counsel to the Inquiry for asking the majority of those, but the significant section of that which I had understood in an email from the inquiry team were lines of questioning that would be explored with this witness that have not been. I don't know, sir, whether you have my written application available to you.
No, it never came to me because it didn't require to.
Yes. Well, the matter concerns, it arises because of the inquiry's terms of reference to explore systems of operating and consider whether those may have played a part in Mr. Bayo's death. And one of the issues that arises is the means by which communications about the situation on the ground are transmitted through the police control room to the ambulance service. We've heard evidence already of Acting Sergeant Maxwell communicating with the control room and advising them that Mr. Bayo was sprayed and may have been battened to the head. And the inquiry will hear evidence from Sergeant Maxwell. He did that for the log, the storm record, but also so that the ambulance would be informed. And the inquiry may hear that the paramedics who attended never got that information prior to their arrival at the scene. And so I had proposed in my application to ask this witness, because I'd made an inquiry with the team as to the appropriate witness for this, and I was told it was this one, about the role that the area control room plays in transmitting information from airwaves to the ambulance service. Whether that's...
Sorry, the role control room...
The role the control room plays in transmitting information received over airwaves from officers to the ambulance service. And whether that's direct to the paramedics or through an ambulance control. The second question was, assuming they do transmit information to the ambulance service, what procedures, SOPs and so on, are in place to provide guidance on when and what information obtained from officers in the field should be passed to the ambulance service?
So assuming they do transmit information to the ambulance service...
What procedures are in place to provide guidance on when and what information obtained from officers in the field should be passed to the ambulance service.
To provide guidance on what, shall I say that a little more slowly?
On when and what information obtained from officers in the field should be passed to the ambulance service. The next question is, how is information transmitted between the control room and the ambulance service, police control room and the ambulance service? And whether and how those contacts are recorded. And the final question I'd proposed was, you'll remember, sir, the evidence of Sergeant Maxwell's transmission about Mr. Bio having been sprayed and perhaps battened on the head. Whether that is information that the controller at ACR should have passed to the ambulance service. Whether he did pass that to the ambulance service, and if not, why not?
Ms. Graham, do you want to comment on this submission?
Yes, I accept that those questions were given by Ms. McCall in her Section 9, Rule 9 application. And I had intended to ask them and didn't have any objection to asking them, but in my desire to complete in a reasonable time, I overlooked those particular questions.
Well, thank you very much for that frank reply, Ms. Graham. I'm going to continue until Thursday morning for the purpose of allowing Ms. Mitchell and Ms. McCall to ask these questions. It clearly will take longer than is appropriate today, and I'm not going to do it without the benefit of real-time transcription. So perhaps you should return to your seats, and once that's done, the witness can be brought back in. Inspector Stewart, I'm afraid we're not going to be able to complete your evidence tonight. There are some further questions that need to be posed. So for administrative reasons, the inquiry cannot sit tomorrow. So could you return to continue with your evidence at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. The inquiry will now adjourn until Thursday morning at 10 o'clock.